really fun and one weird thing to show you this time.
Wow.
So
Weird? That's a first.
It's a little bit weird.
That's fine.
This
Weird.
is not the weird thing.
We've just not had, I don't think we've had weird before on the Bakery Bears.
Well, Ash, and this is like a true blue. I've been trying to think, oh, that makes me think of Madonna. One, two. Favourite bags.
Keep people watching.
Keep me watching. Be excited now. It's like, what on earth is she making? Yeah, I do feel a bit like that with this project. What on earth am I making? Oh, that makes me think of... What does it make me think of? Crystal Maze. Yes, we're currently in the increase zone. Okay, that's a bit random. So,
Welcome, everybody, to the Bakery Bears video show featuring the next episode of My Favourite Blanket. Oh my goodness.
are you excited?
Neil, speaking personally, this is my favourite.
Is your favourite?
And I think
of what?
And I think it's your favourite.
It's definitely my favourite.
And judging on the messages that we've had from all of you, it's also your favourite too.
Yes.
I mean, we're just absolutely thrilled that you're loving it so much because without any doubt at all, I've said to you a few times now, it's just lovely. I love working on it. It's the business.
It's brilliant.
And I'm
We
so
love it.
happy it's back.
I'm so happy it's back.
After a short break.
Yeah, for Dan's fabulous Monasteries. Did you enjoy it?
Of course. The rise
Well, we
and
know
fall.
you enjoyed it because of all your lovely comments.
The rise and fall of the Monasteries has proven to be our most commented on episode ever.
Yeah.
Neil, that's not to say it's the most popular episode ever, because I think the most popular episode ever was the first episode of My Favourite Blanket.
It's not a competition.
It isn't a competition. It isn't. Well, and if it was, you've won one and I've won the other.
There you go.
So it's a draw.
It's equal.
No, but it's not a competition. I mean, what I was going to say was one of the things which we love is when we get messages, just speaking now about the rise and fall of the Monasteries, when we get messages from people and they say things like, I showed it to my husband.
Yeah.
I loved it so much. I knew my dad would enjoy it, so I showed it to my dad. I watched it with my whole family. And what we learned back in 2018 is that we are a lifestyle show and we produce a broad range of content.
Yeah.
And we love it when we put something out which you guys can sit down and enjoy yourself, but also enjoy perhaps with other members of your family who perhaps wouldn't enjoy some of the knitting content. At the end of the day, we're a lifestyle show that just happens to knit quite a lot.
We do.
I think that sums it up to perfection.
Yes. Absolutely.
So, my goodness, thank you all so much. I was really nervous about the rise and fall of the Monasteries.
Super nervous, and I told you not to be, but you can't stop somebody being nervous, can you really?
No, it's because it was a little bit different. And I'm now feeling, once that first episode's out there, it's like your first day at work, isn't it?
Yeah.
Once you've done your first day at work, then it's
Feel a
easy.
bit better, don't you?
Easy to go back the second day.
Yeah.
Second week, though, always better than the first week of work.
Yes.
Yeah, because the first week it's still a bit sort of scary.
Yeah, first week's always a bit daunting, isn't it? Till you sort of get to know everybody. And,
But, I'm now feeling really quite excited about the rest of the series rather than being daunted and worried. So thank you all so much. And the Rise and Fall of the Monasteries will be back next time.
It will.
Today, though, so exciting because it is a brand new instalment from My Favourite Blanket and the colours are just marvellous.
Oh, the colours. Oh, my goodness. I have fully knit through section 3, so I will show you that after you've seen the whole of the episode. This flower that I chose, it's just so lovely, and the colours are so spring-like, and the yarn came out really springy looking, so it's just fantastic, and I so enjoyed knitting. I zoomed through it, the knitting, to be fair. Even, I'll just say actually straight off that my hand, I think it's pretty much it's pretty much back to normal, I think. I'm still going steady with it, but compared to how it was, it's okay. I didn't knit for just over a week. I didn't knit a stitch, and I've just been gradually building it back up again, but fingers crossed, all good.
You've written an article all about that in the latest issue.
Kind of.
Our magazine Knitability, and that comes out on Monday.
Yeah.
So don't miss that. But what I'm excited about in today's My Favourite Blanket is Kay will obviously be doing all the things which you've come to love already in the first 2 episodes.
Yeah.
But what she's also going to do is she's going to answer some of the questions which have arisen in between last episode and this episode. And I think you'll do that, whenever questions arise.
When questions pop up, I just make a note of them and then I'll answer them in the next episode.
For everybody.
Yeah.
And one of the things that she's going to talk about today, which is super exciting, is for those of you who aren't dyeing your own yarn, Kay's going to be talking about advice, how best to approach choosing
how to choose your yarns if you're not dyeing it yourself.
So that's going to be really cool to see. So one of the things actually that has happened in the last 2 weeks, I don't know where I saw it, but I happened to see a video I'm 99% certain it was the Albert Hall, and it was Bruce Forsyth and Roy Castle. Now, for those of you who don't know who Bruce Forsyth and Roy Castle are, because there might be quite a lot of people who don't know.
Yeah, possibly. I think Bruce Forsyth will be more well known than Roy Castle.
Well, these guys grew up, and when I say grew up, their careers began in what was known in this country as the music hall. And the music hall was like song and dance. So you would go on stage and you would do everything. So you'd sing, you'd dance, you'd maybe tell some jokes. You would basically entertain. Good old-fashioned entertainment. Yeah. And this video came up and it started off and it was, Bruce Forsyth was super young. Yeah. And so was Roy Castle. It was black and white. Yeah. And they were singing. And then they break into this full... And this is with a full audience and an orchestra behind them. So there's no 5, 10, 15, 20 takes. This is all straight off. They sang. They then went into a dance routine. They then moved over. Roy Castle was on percussion and Bruce Forsyth's on the piano. And then they swapped around and they're on other instruments. They then go back to the dance routine and they finish off by singing. Amazing. And I'm like, oh my goodness. The best way, actually, I could describe these guys is it's sort of like our version of Sammy Davis Jr. Yeah. Because he could do all that too. Right. He could dance like a demon. Oh, yeah. He was an amazing singer and he was a great musician. He was actually a superb drummer. Right. But so I watched this and I thought, I don't know what it was, but it suddenly made me think, I need to show you. Yeah. So I just found this video of Roy Castle singing Happy Feet from his show that I think was from the 60s. And it was just amazing. He was tap dancing and, very in the sort of style of sort of Fred Astaire. Yeah. That kind of look when he was dancing, he was singing, and it was just amazing. I loved Roy Castle, and I think he's probably most well known, if you're our sort of age, most well known in this country for a children's program really, called Record Breakers. Dedication. Yeah, called Record Breakers, that was on in the sort of 70s and 80s, I would say. And he used to play his trumpet at the end. He played the trumpet and he was amazing. He was a brilliant trumpeter. And just a fantastic all-round entertainer. Yeah. And he died, sadly, really young. Yeah, he did. It was such a shame. Yeah, such a shame. But he was just brilliant. They don't make them like that anymore, do they? Make them. It got us talking about that, didn't it? When you showed it to me, I said, They really don't make them like that anymore. People don't entertain like this anymore. And it made me start thinking about, I'd sort of experienced a little bit of, in this country, it was the working men's clubs, and that's where musicians and bands used to start out. And I used to go around them. I would support as in emotionally support, not playing, because I was just too young. I was like maybe 9, 10, 11. Right. I used to go around with my dad who would be performing, and it was a real education for me into how the music business worked. But then you go out on the stage, you perform, there's nowhere to hide. Granted, it's not a massive audience in a theatre, but it's an extremely rowdy audience in a working men's club who will tell you very quickly if you're rubbish. Yeah. And all that's gone too. Yeah. And then you start to realise now that there's not that many people who are really true, proper entertainers who can sort of do a bit of it all.
Yeah.
Because when they learned, they had to.
They had to.
The only person I could sort of think of who sort of can do a bit of everything, I've not seen him dance, is Seth MacFarlane.
Right.
Because he can act.
And there's Hugh Jackman as well, I guess.
Hugh Jackman's an all-round entertainer.
Yeah, Hugh Jackman's all round. Yeah. And what's his name?
After watching Spirited, you could argue that Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds are all
yeah, that is more, that sort of entertainment on Spirited, that's more in this kind of genre that we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, especially when they're
Acting,
in London.
singing,
and,
dancing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It really is. And what it does is it shows true talent.
Yeah, and maybe that's why we loved Spirited so much.
Because it was a bit old-fashioned.
Back. Yeah, it harks back to that time when people did do a bit of everything. Yeah.
If you want to watch something that just makes your heart sing, go and just type in Roy Castle, Royal Albert Hall. That's all I did when I found all those videos.
Right.
And anything sort of black and white, just flick that on and I guarantee you he's going to be doing something amazing.
Honestly, you'll be smiling all day watching it.
I know what'll make me smile. Seeing some amazing projects. Oh yes. So without further ado, I think I should ask Kay Jones, what's on your doodles?
Right. I've got some really fun and one weird thing to show you this time.
Wow.
But the first thing I want to show you is in one of my favourite bags.
Keep people watching.
Keep you watching. You'll be excited now. It's like, what on earth is she making? Yeah, I do feel a bit like that with this project. What on earth am I making? Not this one. So no, this is in one of my favourite bags from lovely Emma at Moo and Mouse. And isn't this bag just adorable?
It's lovely.
Look at that little owl. Don't you love that owl? Oh, I love him so much. I think I've got 3 or 4 of Emma's bags. I forget how many now. I keep buying them from her when she put, especially the patchwork ones. Emma, you've not put patchwork ones in your shop very recently. I think we need some. Summer themed would be nice. Beachy, seaside, that would be lovely. I'm only kidding. I'm not really. In my lovely bag is a pair of socks. Now, this is a DK pair of socks, DK weight pair of socks. And, oh, my ball's gone through the little thing. So this pair of socks it's the same pattern that I'm using in my looping socks. Now, things have happened with the looping socks, not anything bad, but the looping socks are almost finished. They would have been finished ages ago had it not been for my hand. I won't keep saying that, but things are just taking me a bit longer at the moment. But they are almost finished. And I've had loads of people saying, please write that pattern up. I really like it. It'll be a really good...
It is lovely.
All-round pattern. And, I mean, you are right. I love patterns like that. A good textured pattern that you can use time and time again for men, for women, for children. It's brilliant. But what I thought I would do, I couldn't get this idea out of my head that it would look really cool in DK weight. So I'm knitting a pair in DK weight and it is really cool. But what I've done is I have written the pattern up, but I've also included a DK weight pattern within the pattern. So you get the fingering weight pattern like normal, and then you get a full DK weight pattern, 3 sizes, just like for the fingering weight. So if you wanted to knit up some fingering weight and then some DK for house socks, you could do that. So I thought, yeah, I'm going to knit some up. Now the yarn I'm using is actually not a sock yarn, but I found this yarn because I was doing a tutorial last week. I forget what it was for, a bind off I think, or a cast on. And I was using a ball of this yarn because I just keep a few DK weight balls of yarn in my stash to use for tutorials because it's nice and clear when you use DK weight, you can see the stitches really well. And I was knitting with it, and I actually said on the tutorial, I really like this yarn. And it just made me go and look at the yarn on Wool Warehouse, and I noticed they had some different colours that weren't there before, and I was like, I'm not really buying yarn or trying not to, but I'm going to use this straight away. So I was all right buying it, and it's brilliant. And like I say, it's not a sock yarn, there's no nylon in it, but I'm just going to wear these as bedtime socks with my pyjamas, so I'm not bothered that there's no nylon in, and they will last as long as they last, and that's not a problem. They'll probably last quite well, because, I'm not wearing them in shoes, but I just loved the yarn so much that I had to use it. So the yarn is King Cowl Merino Blend DK. But can you see? I'll hold it. Look at all the coloured neppy things in it. How fun is that? And this colourway is called Tyree. Now I'm presuming that is named after the Scottish island. I think it's Hebridean, isn't it? Inner Hebrides, maybe? I'm not sure if it's inner or outer. I think it's Inner Hebrides. So yeah, I got 2 balls. These are 50-gram balls, so I got 2 to knit a pair of socks. And this one, I just wound this by hand. I find knitting from these, you can knit from a skein that's like this perfectly easily, but when you pull from them, it tends to fly all over the place, doesn't it? So I just wound it into a normal little ball. But look, can you see all the beautiful coloured net things in there? Oh, it's so fun. And I've finished the leg on the first sock. So here we go.
Oh, it's lovely.
Oh, look at that. Isn't it lovely?
It's lush.
Oh, it is lush. I said that to Bryony. I texted her something when she was at school the other day. I can't remember what it was. She sent me a picture of something or other, I don't know. And I said, oh, yes, darling, that's lush. And she texted me back and she said, did you actually just say lush? I said, yeah, I'm totally down with the youngsters. I don't even know.
But you're not. You're not.
Youngsters don't even say that anymore.
They haven't said that in 20 years.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yes.
Anyway, yes, it's lush. Can you see? Look, isn't it fun? And it just looks it's so squishy with this stitch pattern. So I'm using 3.25mm, which is what I think that's pretty much what I always use for DK socks. And I'm using actually higher bamboo interchangeables to knit these, and it's brilliant. And the main reason it's brilliant, normally this higher cable, I'm not a massive fan of the higher cable, but I love the bamboo needle tips, so I kind of tolerate it. But the interchangeables spin in the housing. They do spin, don't they? Yes, they do. They do spin. You can't tell, but I'm twisting the needle tip at this point, and I'm holding this still so you can see that they twist in there. And because of that, I think it makes the magic loop knitting much more pleasurable, because you don't have that big tension that you can sometimes get with certain needles, when you're knitting magic loop, where it loops around, it can cause tension. But because they spin, I think that really helps. So it's been absolutely lovely knitting these on the bamboos. I don't think I've ever used the bamboo interchangeables to knit socks before, DK socks. So that's been a bit of a revelation. So I finished the leg and I'm just about to start the heel flap on the DK version. So what my plans for with this pattern, and also I've changed the name because I really had to. I looked on Ravelry and there was kind of 3 or 4 different sock patterns all called looping socks, and I think their inspiration for those was more the flower. I don't think it was anything to do with Rima's looping. So sometimes I don't mind if a pattern's got the same name, but because there was multiple patterns with the same name, I thought, no, I don't really want to do that. I don't want to cause confusion. And I thought, I'll have a little ponder and something will, I'm sure it'll come to me at some point. And it did. And I was sat knitting on these and I was knitting the yarn. I'm thinking, it just looks a bit wizardy, this yarn. And I was like, Wizardy, the Wizardy Socks. So I looked that up on Ravelry and there's nothing. Now, I'm telling you all now, don't anybody go and design something and call it the Wizardy Socks. So these are the Wizardy Socks, which I think is just adorable. And I'm already planning to knit my Halloween socks this year as Wizardy Socks. Oh, how fun is that? I've got a skein of yarn up there that I bought from Molly actually last Halloween.
Sockoween?
For Sockoween.
Woohoo!
It's
Sockoween
right here,
2023.
It's right here. I've kept it. And I might use this. This was Molly at Homespun House. This was her Hogwarts thingy. What was it called?
Hogwarts at Dusk.
Halloween at Hogwarts 2022. I got this last year, but I think by the time I'd got it, because I like knitting socks a bit kind of before the season. So I got this and I thought I'll just keep it. So I might use this one to knit some Wizardy socks. Oh, I really want to knit loads of Wizardy socks now. It's so cool. So yeah, I'm working through this DK pair. So as soon as I've finished the fingering weight pair that I've shown you before, I'll have those finished and show you next time. The pattern's pretty much written up. I'm going to get the photographs done, and then I'll get it into testing, and then in the meantime I can finish the DK weight pair as well, just so that I can have a couple of photos in the pattern of the DK weight pair as well. That will be forthcoming, hopefully sometime March, April time, with the Wizardy socks will be landing. And this yarn, like I said, I know this is not sock yarn, but you know, there's no hard and fast rules with these things, is there? You know, if you want to knit a pair of socks and it doesn't have nylon, if you love that yarn, as long as you know there's no nylon in there and you don't expect them to last a lifetime, I say knit them, you know. And I'm just loving this so much. It's really nice, this yarn. It's soft, but it does have a bit of something about it. It is superwash, but honestly, I would have to think twice, you know, if I was just feeling this, someone gave me this and said, is this superwash or non-superwash? I really would have to think twice as to whether it was superwash or non-superwash, because it does have a kind of lovely bounce and a little bit of a rusticness to it. It's really good. And Dan used this yarn, if you remember, to knit my Cascades jumper. He used the truffle colourway, and I've worn that several times, and it's a lovely jumper to wear. Very good yarn. £3.69 for 50 grams as well. I don't know how I remembered that. That's a memory. So yeah, £3.69 for 50 grams, which I think is just brilliant. And they had loads of other tweedy sort of colours as well. Absolutely loving these socks, so I can't wait to crack on with them now. So Dan Jones.
Yes.
What's on your needles?
It's a jumper. No, it's not.
No, it's not.
It's a tank top. No, it's not. It is a tank top. I'm trying to cover all the...
No, it is a tank top, a vest. Most people, I think,
it's a vest.
It's a vest.
It's a tank top.
It is a tank top.
It's a jumper without sleeves. That's the answer. That's what we'll call it.
A jumper without sleeves.
Correct. Then everyone knows what you mean. Yes, look, it's the Roosty tank top.
Look at this, everybody. Oh,
I'm
my
knitting
goodness.
a fingering weight jumper without sleeves.
I'm in awe of this. I keep looking at it every time you've done a little bit more. It's just unbelievably...
It's really amazing, because I anticipated that I'd have a problem with fingering weight, in the sense of it would take me so long to knit it that I would become bored with the project. Similar to sort of what was happening with me with double knitting. You know, it took so long that it just... I mean, the problem for me with double knitting is I don't see the wearability once it's finished. And also as well, it just takes so long. It takes me so long. So I was fearful that the same thing was going to happen with fingering weight, but it's not happening, which is weird. I feel like I'm making okay progress, which is really good.
You are.
And what I'm doing, which is really great,
just
is
amazing.
I'm learning huge amounts, because had I not done all the things that I've done with fingering weight over the years, developing that technique for alternating my floats to ensure that I get a nice, even finish, I've had to even refine it even more and mix it up even more, because what I was getting certain bigger stitches and certain slightly smaller stitches. But what I've learnt is, and this is what is so cool about this, is if you know what you're looking for, because it's in fingering weight, the fabric is more forgiving, because if you spot a mistake on that particular round, when you then hit the next round, you can rectify the mistake. So, okay, that one round of fingering weight might have a couple of stitches which are maybe a bit poppy or sucking in a tiny bit. The round after, you've rectified it. And then you can keep that technique then through the rest of it. So I'm finding that it is improving my technique just by knitting with fingering weight. And I'm really surprised at that. If I'm honest, I expected to have problems which I didn't know how to rectify. But as I've said, because I've been through it with all the different jumpers, I mean, I've not knit that many, but I've knit quite a few now, And I've learned so much that I'm spotting the errors and fixing them before they become like, oh my goodness, I've knitted half the jumper and it's a disaster. So actually, fingering weight seems to be slightly more forgiving than because you make a similar mistake with Aran weight and it's going to jump out more.
Yes, because your stitches are much smaller, aren't they? So it's not as noticeable.
They disappear into the overall fabric, which is just marvellous.
But aren't the colours lovely? These are all of the colours now. I think you've used all of them, haven't you?
Do you know what? I feel like I'm making a carpet.
Yeah, it's like a tapestry. It's just so beautiful. So yeah, these are all of the colours now that are going to run through the whole thing. And I chose all of these colours because the design itself uses entirely different colours that just weren't my palette. It uses like blues and oranges. It looked lovely, but it's just not my palette. So it's difficult re-choosing all of the colours. Do you know what I mean? Swapping all of the colours
when
out.
There's so many.
When there's so many. There's what?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
No, that's white. 5 or 6.
This is terrible viewing.
Yeah,
terrible
right.
viewing.
There's 5 or 6 colours. And I
Tune into the Baker Bears. They're counting boxes.
I wanted this palette that was sort of browns and pinks and creams and it's just, isn't it just lovely?
There's one row here, this row here, which is really cool because this row comes in when you've got 2 colours here on the go already.
Yeah.
You bring in 2 more colours and you float up the 2 colours which you've got sat down here.
Gosh,
that was like way cool. And what I like about that is I feel like that's working me towards, doing a row which has got more than 2 colours on it.
Yeah.
That's the next thing.
There's 5 colours. We've got them all here, look. Hang on, can I do this?
Well, I can because I've got big hands.
Bigger hands. Hold them all together. There you go. Look at all the colours. Aren't they lovely? Oh, I just love them. So all of the yarn is Jameson and Smith jumper weight. And I bought these from Fine Fettle Yarns that's based in Northumberland. It's a brilliant shop. Excellent service. I've bought from her a few times. It arrives super quick. Such a nice lady. I think she's called Judith. But, if you are looking for some of this and you don't want to order it all the way from Jameson and Smith, then, because that Fine Fettle is quite local really to us. It's the next county up. So I got them all from there. This one is stone. What I will do the next time Dan shows this is I'll find out all of the colours for you and I'll let you know what all of those colours are. But I can see stone, I can see brown mix, and I'll look up the other ones for next time so that we've got a full list of the actual shade numbers. But what I did is an interesting process re-choosing colours. It's very difficult when you've got a colour chart in front of you because the chart comes in colour on the pattern and then you've got to imagine it in different colours. It really was quite tricky, but I chose the colours and then what I did was I used my charting software that I use for designing and I made the colours myself because within that you can sort of mix colours. So I mixed the colours to the closest I could find and then made a chart and then that gave me an idea on what it was going to look like. I was like, yeah, that looks lovely. And then I ordered the yarn. So it was quite a long process to swap out the colours, but really, I really enjoyed doing it. And I think to get something that's completely individual to you, I think it's just brilliant because I just don't think I would have really worn one in blues and oranges, those kinds of colours. But this one, I feel like I'll wear all the time.
Cool. So that's the Roosty tank top, and yeah, I've really enjoyed it. It's really fun and making a reasonable amount of progress. What else is on your needle? Right.
So this is the weird project. I'm knitting a cowl. Now that in itself is not weird in any way, shape or form. But I'm knitting it out. It's the yarn that makes it interesting. And I'm knitting this as a gift for a very special family member who is going to be 21 next month. And I made her a cowl, actually, and I looked on Ravelry when it was because I couldn't remember, and it was on there. I had put the project on. I made her a cowl in 2016. It's called the Gap-tastic cowl. Can you remember this cowl? It really did the rounds at the time. And what had happened is someone had gone into Gap, the shop, and seen this cowl and loved it and thought, that's expensive, I can make that. So that's what she did, and then she put the pattern up for free on Ravelry. So it's called Gaptastic, and it's a bulky weight moss stitch knit in the round cowl, and I made it at the time. And I saw a photo of her recently, and she got the cowl on, and she has told me that she wears it a lot. And I thought, gosh, do you know, I would have never thought that. And I thought, I really want, maybe I'll make her another cowl for her birthday, 'cause she's coming up 21. So my first thought was I'd make her another Gaptastic cowl. Now, I changed my mind on that for several reasons. The main one being that it's all knit one, purl one. It's moss stitch, so it's all knit one, purl one. And I just thought with my hand issues, that's probably not a good idea, and bulky yarn. The second reason was I couldn't find the exact yarn that I used last time. It was a Stylecraft, and it was a bulky yarn. It was something like Weekender Chunky, and it's discontinued, and I couldn't find anything that was comparable. So what I did was I went into town at the weekend, and I went into Boys. Now Boys, if you don't know, in this country, it's kind of like department store is a bit of a grand term for it, but it sells all kinds of things, and it does a lot of crafting things, and one of those is wool. So I thought, I'm going to have a look and see what they've got. And they had this one. It's a Stylecraft, and it's called Special XL Tweed, and it's a super chunky. You can see that, super chunky. And it's this tweedy grey, which I know she'll like. And the colour's just called grey. That's very inspiring, isn't it? And you get, this is the crazy thing, so this is 100 grams, and you get 68 metres or 74 yards for 100 grams, and it's 10 millimetre. Is that not bonkers? So I've got 4 skeins of it, because I thought last time I used 3 skeins of the chunky, which was slightly lighter than this in thickness. So that, right, I'll get 4 skeins and that should be enough. And it didn't cost me very much. I think I spent £13 in Boys, but I bought some sweets as well. I bought some Dib Dabs for Bryony and for Dan and something else. So it might have cost me £12 for this yarn, so it's not expensive. It's just acrylic. 97% premium acrylic, I beg your pardon, and 3% viscose, because there's just no point, you know, she's a student. There's really no point in me knitting it in expensive yarn. You know, I've got to be confident that she can throw this in the washer and dryer and it won't come to any harm. I think you can dry it. Yes, cool tumble dry, brilliant. And I'm knitting a cowl. So I thought, right, I really can't do the Gaptastic because of all the knits and purls. And especially with these massive needles. So I thought what would be fun is what would it look like in my Crunkled pattern. Because although that's ribbon, you do get some plain knit rounds, you do get a break from it. And I thought I'll be okay with that. So the second challenge I had was I didn't know how many stitches to cast on, not a clue. I knew how many's on the Gaptastic. It's a free pattern, so I can tell you, I think it was 131 stitches on size, I don't know, was it 8 or 9 millimetre? I can't even remember now. So I knew this yarn was thicker, and I'm using 10 millimetre. So I've cast on a few less than that. If this size works out, I'll tell you what stitch count I used. I don't want to tell you at this stage in case it's not the right size when I take it off the needles. But this is where I'm at. It's like I'm knitting it for a giant or something. I mean, look at it. But look at the pattern, it's so cool. So this is the Crunkled pattern. But it's like gigantic. Guess what the gauge is? It's 2 stitches to the inch.
Wow.
2. Look, but look at the stitches, look.
I know. It's ginormous.
But isn't it lovely? I want this to be a double loop. So I want to be able to loop it twice. So at the moment, you can see it's all scrunched up here. It's impossible for me to tell right now if this is going to be the right size. I'm really, really hoping it is. You know, when I stretch out the rib, it does look quite long. I really hope it's going to be the right size. And the needles are 10 millimetre. I mean, I ask you, look at these needles. It's hard to give a contrast, isn't it? We need a thin needle. So here's a 4 millimetre, look, and there's 10 millimetre. Crazy. I actually don't like these needles at all. Now, it's a combination. What is it I don't like about these needles? They're Chow Goo interchangeables. because this is the only 10mm I had. I'm grateful that I did have a 10mm in the interchangeable set. So it's a 32-inch cord, 10mm ChowGoo interchangeables. What I don't like about these needles is, can you see the taper? It's a nice long taper, but then it just stops and becomes straight. So there's no where it stops and becomes straight. It's a real kind of up and then like that. You know, it's a real angle. And then you've got the same thing really down here. So where it's tapering to join onto the cable, it's a very harsh taper. It's straight down and then, you know, the sort of the decreases. The taper just starts suddenly. Now what that means is two things. When you are knitting along, I'm finding the stitches don't slide nicely over the needle, you know, for you to get ready to knit them. I have to sort of grab some and shove them over that sort of jump here. You really have to push them over. They don't want to glide naturally because they reach this point here. And I think they just find it difficult to slide over it smoothly. Whereas if this was like a gentle taper all the way down, I feel like they would glide over it better. But then also when you are knitting with them, every stitch, you put your needle in and when it reaches that point where it goes straight, I can feel it. It goes bump, jump. Do you know what I mean? So it's not pleasant to knit, I'll be honest. It's really not. But I'm only doing like 2 or 3 rounds a day. I'm really not pushing it with my hand because it's just so weird to knit. The movement that you've got to make to knit yarn, the movement is massive. So, you know, you've got to put your stitch in and you have to go, whoa, like that. Because I'm a thrower. So you've got to, it's a really big movement. Whereas normally when I'm knitting, I'm just sort of just a little movement like that. But you've got to go. So I think it's using an entirely different set of muscles, which is why I'm being really careful with it. So I'm halfway through the second ball, and I think the first ball, it might have taken me like 2 hours to knit it. So it is going to be quite a quick project, but I'm taking my time. But if it works out, I think it's just going to be so lovely. I really just hope it's going to be long enough. That's my only thought. I haven't cut off that many stitches compared to the Gaptastic. I really haven't. It's quite a close number to it. And the yarn is much thicker and the needles are much bigger, so you would think it's going to be okay. But I'll report back next time because it needs to be finished within the next couple of weeks. So I'll show you it finished and let's keep our fingers crossed that it works out okay.
Does it feel instinctively like it's not long enough?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, that's okay then.
Because,
cool.
You know, if I stretch out the rib...
Yeah.
I think it's going to be okay. I could kind of measure it. I think what I might do is just try and measure it a little bit and see what it's measuring at.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's another jumper without sleeves.
Oh, my goodness.
That's the answer. It's the new name, the new global name.
Yeah, you've all got
for
to
tank top.
Call it that now.
Jumper without sleeves. And
you should design a pattern and call it that.
The jumper without sleeves. There's probably
really
one
cool.
out there already.
Maybe there is.
And what's funny about this is...
Ooh, another one for me!
Is the stacker. And so in the round and then split. And that's the back. And when I showed you this last time, we were telling you that it was a bit challenging to understand. But, you know, we got there and up to the top and shaping now for the neck, which is really good. And, you know, lots of positives. Primarily, I would say it is the fact that the stitches look a similar size, whether they're in colour work or they're in plain knitting, which is really good because that's often not the case. And, I mean... It's just a different ball game to fingering weight. Fingering weight feels very refined, and this doesn't.
But it's equally as beautiful.
Is it?
I think it's lovely.
I mean...
Don't you think it's
I fear that I may be becoming a fingering weight snob.
Oh, really?
When it comes to garments. I mean, just having that sat on my knee there and feeling it, and it does feel lovely. It's got a very specific feel, Let Alone Be.
It does.
Feels different to Jameson and Smith. It's very warming. It's very light. And it's definitely now, I would say to you categorically, if I'm walking the moors, I would like one of these on, thank you very much, because they're just great at letting the air in, keeping you dry, doing all the things that you want when you're out for the day. But when it comes down to when you get home and you're sat in front of the fire, or round the house, or general everyday life, this, for me, unless you're living in Iceland, is probably not what you'd want to wear. You'd probably want to wear something a little bit lighter, a little bit more refined. Lighter, I mean, in weight, generally. Because it is light, but of course fingering weight is lighter because it's naturally thinner.
Yeah.
So, don't think that I'm saying Let Lope's heavy to wear, because it isn't. It's like air. And I think that you'll really enjoy wearing it.
I do too.
I just wish it looked a little bit more refined. But that's fine.
But,
It's actually, this is very similar to what you've got on today.
Oh, the colour?
Yeah, because
it
there's like a black, she's got a black under top, whatever that is, and black leggings and more black. So you could actually wear this with, I mean, it's definitely your colours.
Yeah, I mean, I would wear tops like this with shirts, with, like a shirt, a collared shirt, or the white one I wear with the one that's like this, that's not hand knitted.
It is a really interesting thing to do, to be knitting this and knitting that at the same time. It really does show you the difference between what I would say is very much a working garment to a more sort of, I could wear this going out on the town garment.
Yeah, I mean, this one, you would look good. Like, if I was like gardening, for example.
Yeah.
And it was that weather where it's not freezing cold, but it's a bit chilly.
Yeah.
This would be great, to wear in the garden, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas the other one that you're knitting, I'd wear that to go into town. And
It is quite challenging, though, the pattern, reading the pattern.
Oh, my goodness.
It's really, you sort of like trying to discover the secrets of alchemy.
It really is.
But, an element of that is just going to be that I've done a lot of jumpers, yoked in the round completely all the way through. And, more experience doing things like this is going to be a positive. I didn't really seem to have that much of a problem, though, with the Samantha.
No.
I could read the pattern and, you were able to tell me, OK, well, this is what you need to do. And, 3-needle bind off, which amazingly you'd already done a tutorial. So I just watched that and then I was able to do it. There's been much more head scratching with this one. It is a frustration for me with patterns.
Tricky pattern to understand.
I wish there was like a kite mark, which patterns had to, because it is there's just such a lot of, we've bought a lot of patterns, as I'm sure all of you have, bought a lot of patterns over the years where you'd look at it and you go, well, there's just no way that's ever going to work. So you just, that pattern, the money's gone, and you've just got to accept the fact that you're not going to be able to understand it, and it's an impossible task to be able to. It is.
I mean, you can go onto Ravelry, can't you, and look at the projects and see if anybody's made any notes about it, but that would mean that you've got to be on Ravelry to do that, obviously. That you would hope that, I know what you mean, you wish there was some kind of system.
That there was a recognised standard of clarity with every pattern, and there isn't.
No,
which is a shame.
I think you are taking a risk, aren't you, buying a pattern?
But it's really good to support.
Oh, absolutely.
The industry. So even when we've purchased stuff we've not used it feels good to be supporting. Yeah. Because everybody's different at the end of the day.
All of the other patterns that you've knitted have been brilliant, haven't they?
But they've not been.
We're a bit puzzled as to why this one.
Because this is split and.
It's a different construction. We have already changed it. We've put the shoulder stitches here on hold instead of binding them off.
Because we didn't want to have to
Because otherwise you've got to sew them together, and we
I
can
can't
just
do that.
We can just 3 needle bind off the shoulders
That'd be much
instead
nicer.
instead of sewing them. So we are making our own little adjustments based
As I'm
on
sure most people do.
past experience. Yeah. So all I would
And
say
that's
is,
what I mean, actually. If I'd had more experience doing things like this,
Yes,
you'd
then
probably
you
be able to
wouldn't-
go, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter that I can't understand it.
because I know what to do.
Because I know what to do.
Because I know what to do, and you can just follow the numbers.
And that's the next step for me to get to that point.
Yeah, so if you are hugely experienced in knitting garments like this, I'm sure you'd be okay. You'd be able to just sort of know from your own knowledge. So I would definitely say it's an experienced knitter's pattern.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. What else on your needles?
So the last thing I've got to show you is a project that is so nearly done, it's not even funny. But these, that was a cross between this and these. I didn't know quite what to say.
Residence, the lady of the house speaking.
These socks are the socks that broke my hand. Not literally, I didn't break my hand, but you know what I mean. That really caused me the problem. I know it's these socks, but they're nearly finished. And it's the socks for Dan.
But it's the yarn, isn't it?
Now, I'll tell you something about the yarn because I bought some more.
The yarn is just too much. It's too difficult to manoeuvre, or it just works your hand out extensively. And for such a prolific knitter as you, for this to do your hand, that just shows you.
Well, the problem has kind of resolved itself because it's the yarn is, you'll remember this pair of socks, I'm sure, but it's Trekking XXL, and this is a vintage ball of yarn from my stash. It's years old, and the colourway is 126, and it's Brax Candy is the name of it. And I say the problem has resolved itself because when I first started knitting these, and I love the yarn so much, I went looking for the yarn. And I couldn't find any in this country, but I did find, I think it was Simply Sock yarn in the States, had some. So I ordered a couple of skeins. It took a while, but I did get it. This is one of them. And let me tell you, this yarn is nothing like the yarn that I'm currently knitting
And is
with.
that a good thing?
It's a good thing in terms of my hand because it's so much finer.
Right.
So this is one of the balls that I got.
And did you just say that this one is older and that one's newer?
Yes.
So have they had complaints?
Well, I don't know.
Have loads of people said it was just too hard to work with?
I don't know what it is, but it's difficult to show you. But, I mean, trust me when I say...
One is super thick and the other one is not.
One is really plump.
One's plump and bouncy.
This one is more like...
more like an opal.
More like an opal.
Look at me go.
More like a... Yeah. It really does look quite fine in comparison. And I'm sure the yardage, 420 metres. 420 metres is telling me the yardage is the same on both of them. But I can tell just by feeling this, the base is not the same as the one I've been working with. So I suppose that's a good thing because, you know, this is the completed sock if you remember it. And it is really quite a thick sock yarn. And
I think it'll be warm.
Oh yeah, I think they'll be lovely and warm. And I think it's because of the denseness of it. This is the second sock. I'm on the toe, everybody. Look, I'm on the toe.
But I had to talk you down off
because
blitzing it through because you just got to injure yourself again.
When I started knitting again, I was literally working 1 row a day on these, and I thought I'm just going to do 1 row a day. I had 20 rounds left on the foot, and then I had the toe. I thought, right, it might take me a month to finish them, but I'll do it that way. Well, I got a bit cocky, and one morning, a few mornings ago, I thought, I've been okay the past few days, I'll knit a bit more, and I knit about 7 or 8 rounds, and on the last round I was knitting, my finger started to spasm.
Never a good sign.
No. I was like, oh, right, okay, put them down immediately. And I did, and I didn't touch them for a couple of days. And I think I caught it in time, you know, before I did any more re-damaging of my hand. But clearly that showed me that it is these socks that have caused me the problem because of the denseness of them and because of...
So it's got to be a 1 row a day job.
Well, I'm on the toe now, and I'm a few rounds into the toe.
But don't push it.
But the toe is different because the stitches are getting fewer, aren't they? And I'm not doing any of the ribbing because this has got a ribbing element in it. So I feel like I can probably get these done in a few days now.
Don't push it though.
No, I won't push it. And I've just got just a little bit left, but I'll have enough.
Evil yarn.
But I love them, you know, and it does strike the question. You said to me, oh, you should burn those socks. I said, don't be crazy. I've nearly finished them and they're beautiful. And I'm sure they will wear really well. I hope they do, because I put opal in on the heel, and I had all that big thing about opal, didn't I? You can just feel the difference. Feel the heel.
That feels more rustic to that.
Yeah, but it
That's
also
smoother.
feels thicker than there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So there's, you know, whatever's happened to the trekking, it isn't the set. This is not the same base as this I'm knitting here. So whether that's been a conscious decision by the company, or whether it's just something that's evolved over the years, you know, because things change, don't they?
Will you pick that up quickly and knit with it, or will it make you concerned and you leave it for a year or two?
I'd be okay knitting with this. I got this one because I thought it looked Christmassy. Look, this one is 698. Just thought it looked a bit Christmassy. I would, but I'm not going to knit you a pair of socks for a little bit.
No, don't.
I'm going to give myself a Dan sock break after these.
Yeah.
But yeah, nearly finished. They kind of broke me, but so nearly finished, and I'll be really pleased when they get done.
And they'll be cherished.
They'll be done by next time, absolutely. I'm going to have so many things finished next time, because I was so close to finishing lots of things and I've just not been able to get them done.
That's the trick, isn't it, folks?
I am, let me tell you.
As we get older, don't push yourself sometimes.
No.
Because that's when disaster happens.
Let me tell you, I
know your
completely
limits.
took for granted the fact that I could knit, I'll be honest. I never gave it a second thought of being able to knit, but I've got perspective now of not being able to knit for that week, and it was, it wasn't good. No.
Now then, ladies and gentlemen, there are certain things in the world that bring joy to your heart. Those little things that when you see them, you know that all is right with the world. Seeing our mechanic's car parked outside the garage, you know that everything's right with the world.
I'm always happy when I see Carl's car.
Watching a programme with Michael Portillo in it. Seeing Dan Campbell do up-downs with his team on Hard Knocks.
I love him.
These are all things which bring joy to our hearts. And now, my favourite blanket. Yes, this is Kay's brand new series for 2023, where she's taking through every stage of creating an exclusive blanket design, which we hope when you've finished, you will call My Favourite Blanket. After a short break, she's back. And I wonder what she's doing this time.
I adore creating and knitting blankets, so I decided to design a new one just for us. In this series, I'm going to show you how to make your own, from the yarn to the stitches. Join me as we knit through the seasons to create my favourite blanket. Welcome everybody to another episode of My Favourite Blanket. Yes, we're back out in the woods, and it's very appropriate today to be in the woods because the flower that I've chosen for the March the March plant, so we're on section 3 now, the blanket, so that's going to be inspired by a plant that flowers in March. And the flower that I've chosen is a woodland flower. I'd never heard of this flower, but I was so thrilled when I found it because it's my favourite colour of a flower that you see kind of in nature. And it's a blue flower, can you believe it? And the flower is called a blue-eyed Mary. Now, I'd never heard of this. I don't know if anybody out there has heard of this particular plant. From the research that I've done, it is scattered lightly throughout the UK, and it likes woodland environments. It's a really low growing plant, and it starts to flower in March, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's got a bright blue flower, it's got 5 petals and a lovely white centre, and then the leaves are a gorgeous fresh green. It's absolutely beautiful. So I'm just over the moon that I can dye up yarn inspired by this gorgeous blue flower. Now, it's been around in this country, it's been known of in the wild since the 1840s, so it's quite a well-established little woodland plant. And I think it also said, from my research, it said that it can be quite freely grown in gardens. So that's the flower that is inspiring us today. Can't wait to dye it up. So the first thing we've got to do, of course, to be able to do that is to get back indoors. It is quite chilly today, but I think this might be the last time you see the big coat. I'm not holding my breath, but maybe next time I will have transitioned to a lighter coat. We shall see. So let's get back indoors, into the kitchen, get cozied up and get dyeing. Okay, so here we are, all ready to dye our beautiful yarn today. So what we're going to need, all the usual suspects. So first of all, we've got the yarn. The yarn that I dye through the whole of this series, it's going to be the same each time. But I mean, I'll tell you each time, but just so that you know, if you want to prepare yourself, it will be the same each time. And what I've got here are 4 skeins. No, there's 3 there. There is 4. I've got 4 skeins of fingering weight yarn, and each of these skeins are 50 grams. So 4 50-gram skeins. Now, I'm only going to be using 2 50-gram skeins for knitting the blanket, but I'm always going to be dyeing an extra. The reason I'm doing that is so that if you are dyeing a single 100-gram skein, then the sort of quantities for the tonal in particular will be the same. So each time I'll be dyeing effectively 100 grams of each of the colours, and then I'll just be using 1 of each to actually knit the blanket. So I've got my yarn, and this is all soaking already just in some warm water, and a scoop or so, tablespoon or so of citric acid is in there just to get that nice and soaked through with our citric acid, which is our mordant, and the mordant is the thing that makes the dye permanently stick to the yarn. So the next thing we're going to need is the thing to dye our yarn in. So as always, I've got my stainless steel pots. These are standard kind of casserole pots, I would say. I like the double-handled ones because they're really easy to move around. They can get quite heavy with all of the water in, so having 2 handles is really handy. Once you've dyed in any equipment, so once you've used any of your equipment for dyeing, it should only be used for dyeing, because dye powders are toxic. So once you use them for dyeing, just keep them somewhere safe and use them only for dyeing yarn. So we've got those. I've got rubber gloves. I've got some brushes because we're going to be speckling again today. And I've also got my measuring spoon. I use this measure to measure everything when I'm dyeing yarn, and it's a 1/8 of a teaspoon. So I try and always say 1/8 of a teaspoon when I'm measuring out, but if I forget, then the teaspoon is always 1/8 of a teaspoon. I've got some spare oilcloth just to protect my work surfaces. I've got my dye book with my recipe in, very, very important. My big spoon, got to have that. Mask, of course, and then my dye colours. So today we're using 4 different colours, and I'm actually using 2 landscape dyes, 1 jacquard and 1 Dharma dye. And I know that some people, you know, you obviously won't have a range of the different manufacturers, but each time I will tell you the kind of colour it is, and then you should be able to find a good comparison with a different dye company if you don't have the shade I've got. So what have we got? So first of all, a Dharma dye. This one is Sour Apple. I've used this before. It's that sort of really bright, fresh green that's like on a Granny Smith apple. It's a really lovely green. I actually have a kind of an issue with green dyes. I struggle to find green dyes that I really, really like. In particular, Jacquard. I'm not really keen on the greens that Jacquard do. They do one called Emerald, and normally I really like emerald green, but I just don't really like that one very much. But anyway, Sour Apple from Dharma I really, really love, and I do use this quite often. We've then got a Jacquard dye, which is Periwinkle, and as that describes, it is that true periwinkle blue. So periwinkle blue for me, it is a blue, but it's sort of leaning slightly lilac-y. So periwinkle. And then the two landscape dyes. The first one is Splash, and this is like a true blue. I've been trying to think, oh, that makes me think of Madonna. I've been trying to think of what shade this colour is, and it's kind of like, do you know on a Rice Krispie packet, you know, Kellogg's Rice Krispies, do you know that blue shade? It's kind of like that. It's just a pure, true blue for me. And then the last colour, another landscape dye, and it's Iris. This is, as it's described, if you know an iris flower, it's that kind of, it's purple, but it's bluish as well. So that's the last colour. So that's everything we're going to be needing. Our yarn is already soaked, so it's time to get dyeing. Okay, so we've got our water heating up here in our pot. Now I've only got about an inch of water in there. We're going to be doing the speckled colour first. So just about an inch of water, and there's another scoop of citric acid in there, which is about a tablespoon, and that's heating up nicely. So I'm going to get my skeins and pop them in. So just squidge out the water. So I've got the 250 grams here, give it a little shake. If you're dyeing just 150 gram, the process for the speckling is exactly the same. You would just probably put in a little bit less water. So we're going to drop those in and then move them around so that we've got a good amount of surface area of each of the skeins showing on top of the water. Now at the moment I've just got on these little thin gloves, and the water's quite warm, but I'm okay, I'm only in and out, and then I've got thicker gloves for moving the yarn when the water gets a bit hotter. So make sure you've got lots of surface area of each of the yarns showing. And what we want for speckling is that the yarn is sitting just above the surface of the water. I don't know if you can see, but some of it is obviously in the water, but a lot of it is sitting just above. So that's now coming to a simmer. There's movement on top of the yarn, so I'm going to turn the heat down just so that it maintains that nice hot temperature, but it's not a rolling boil. We especially don't want a rolling boil for speckling because it disturbs the yarn, and we want it to be as still as possible so that the speckles all set nicely. Okay, so I'm going to pop on my mask and we'll get the first colour into the yarn. Okay, so the first colour going in is the Splash. So the landscape dyes Splash. This is such a pretty colour. And this one is very granular. I know I've said this before, but landscape dyes, a lot of the dyes are very, very granular. It looks almost like sand that's been dyed. So I'm going to scoop up quite a nice little bit on my brush and take it over. And just as we did before, I'm going to just speckle in just sort of random little areas. And we can always go back and add more, but it takes a minute for the dye to kind of appear, if you know what I mean. So just do a little bit and we can always go back and do more. So just choose some areas and speckle it on. Isn't this the most gorgeous blue? Go across the tops of both of, because this is the top of the skeins here where our ties are. So I make sure I go across the top of both of them there. One more in the middle, I think. I'm going to put a bit more over here. And don't forget the edges. You know, go right up to an edge and put some there, look. And maybe over here too. I do want, with these colours, I do want blue to be the predominant colour, because the flower is so beautifully bright blue, and we're really celebrating that with this colour. I think that's okay. I'm going to put a tiny bit more on that one there. That looks good, doesn't it? Okay, so that's our first colour, and then go to your next one, which will be Periwinkle. So this is also a blue, but it does have that hint of more of a purplish blue coming through. So this one is very powdery. So you treat this one differently. I don't put as much on the brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on top of where I dyed before, but I'm going to come off it a bit. So a bit on it like that, and then off a little bit. Just so that we get some areas that are just purely periwinkle. And you can see how this dye, when it starts to set, it'll break, and you might not be able to see it on camera, but I can see it quite clearly. When it breaks, there's a lot of like a pinkish, purplish colour in there, which is lovely. So take your time and go around. Oh, can you see that speck of pink there that just appeared? You might not be able to see it, but it did. And by putting a sort of a quick, did you see how I did a quick speckle like that in the centre of that blue? It intensifies the blue as well in that portion and gives us a real pop of colour at that point. If you want to choose an area that doesn't have any colour at all and put a little bit on, then do that too. I'm going to go over there a little bit. Bring that out a bit there. That looks good. Okay. And then the final colour is the iris, and this one is a true sort of really poppy purple. Again, this one is the more granular form, but I'm going to still go a bit steady. My brush for this one is small. It's a really small brush. I tend to choose the brush size depending on how concentrated I want that particular colour. I'm going to do the same thing with this, but choose a sort of slightly different area. So a little bit on the blue and a little bit off the blue. So bring it into an area that doesn't have any colour, but still keep a little bit on the blue. Can you see that purple? Oh, it's so pretty. Because this flower, although it is blue, I found lots of photos where it's got that kind of purplish tint to it. I think that's good. Yep. Okay. So that's our first layer of colour done, and it looks fabulous, I've got to say. So now we just need to leave this for a few minutes. Leave it for 5 minutes. It is quite, you know, it's getting to the boil now. I'm actually going to turn that off because I don't want to boil my yarn. I don't like to boil it. It's very, very hot already, hot enough. So just leave it for 5 minutes to set all those colours, and then we'll come back, we'll check the set, we'll turn the skein, and then we'll repeat that process. Okay, so our yarn has just had about 5 minutes there to set, and just to check that we're good to go and that everything's set, just get your big spoon and go into an area and just push down, grab some water and just drop it, and you'll see the water going down is clear and there's no disturbance to the speckles. Can you see as I push that down there? Those speckles are not moving. You know, that dye is now set. It doesn't take very long because, relatively speaking, we've not got a lot of dye in there. The temperature is good, we've got citric acid in there, so it doesn't take very long. So now we can move these skeins and then repeat the process. So let's have a look at it as I lift it up. Oh, look at that. Aren't they just lovely, those speckles? So you can see we've got quite a lot going on here. If we turn it around, not a lot at all going on here. So this is what we're now going to correct. So what I do is I move the skeins on the ties, sort of not quite halfway, maybe a third of the way round. And then also at the same time, what I do is I flip the skein so that we get dye on both sides. So move it and then flip that around and then just lift it up and give it a little jiggle and then pop it back down. So have a look, when you pop it back down, just check which side has got the least amount of dye, because what we want to do when we drop this down is expose a lot of the undyed yarn. And you can see there we've got plenty of undyed sections to go at. There's quite a lot of dyed yarn there, so what I'm going to do is sort of lift that up and turn it, and we'll try and find an area that's not so dyed, but that looks good. So we're ready to go with another layer. So I'm just going to repeat the process that I did before, maybe with a bit less dye, because what I like as well with a skein is that some areas you'll get quite a good deep saturation of speckles, and then other areas it might be a bit lighter. Just adds a bit more interest. So we're just going to repeat what we did before, starting with the splash. And now the periwinkle. And then finally the iris. And there we go. So that's our yarn complete now. So I'm just going to allow that to simmer. I don't know if you can see, but you've just got a little bit of movement on the surface. Someone asked me what I meant by simmer. For me, simmering is where you've just got sort of bubbles popping occasionally on the surface, and it's not sort of going crazy, boiling its head off. It's just a gentle sort of bursting of bubbles over the surface. So just let that cook away, just at gentle simmer for 5 minutes or so, and then it'll be set and we can pop it outside to cool off, and we can get ready to dye our second yarn. Right, so we're ready to dye our tonal. Now I say tonal, but this is actually more of a variegated. I thought it would be fun to play around with this second skein a little bit. So I've got about half a pot of water here with another tablespoon of citric acid, and that's nice and hot now. You can see the steam coming up, but it's not sort of boiling, it's just really nice and hot. So I'm going to pop my first dye into the pot. So the first dye I'm going to use is the splash. Now we want this background colour. We want it to be, you know, a colour that you can see, but we don't want it overpowering the speckles. We really want those speckles to pop through when we're knitting with the yarn. So I want to keep it to a kind of soft tone, but not super pastel. So I'm going to put in just like a flat eighth, probably even a little bit less than a flat eighth, because we can always add more. So you can see it's a very shallow, almost flat eighth of the splash. In it goes. And then get your big spoon and give that a good mix around. That looks about the right shade actually. So make sure it's fully dissolved in, that dye. So give it a good mix around, because this is a sort of tonally, variegated-y, non-speckly. That looks good. Okay, so I've got my 2 skeins here, which I've actually emptied the water out because we're going to be putting this back in the bowl in between the colours. So I've got it here, I've squidged it out already. Give it a little shake just to loosen all those fibres so it's not clumped together, so we get a good dye coverage. Now I'm going to drop this in as I've done before, and I'm going to drop it to about 1/3 of the skein to absorb the dye that's in there. So drop it in, I'm going to check the colour, that looks good. So I'm going to drop it in, and as I do I'm going to use my spoon just to sort of wiggle the yarn around to make sure we get good coverage of the colour. And as we absorb the dye, you can go a bit quicker. And just keep an eye on where your skein is. That is about 1/3 we've got there. So when we get to that point of 1/3, keep it at that point and just wiggle your yarn around until it's fully absorbed the dye. It really doesn't take much more than a few seconds, to be honest, because there's not a lot of dye in there, and it will soak in super quick. I think it's pretty much absorbed. So if I lift it up, can you see the shade of blue? So it's a definite shade, we can see it, we can see that it's that lovely blue, but it's not super strong. So that looks good. If you look into the pot, it's now clear. So I'll just give it, another 30 seconds just to make sure we've got all of that dye absorbed. So now I'm going to lift that back up, give it a squidge, and pop it back over here for a second. And now we're going to put in our second colour. Now we're going to go with the iris. Now I'm going to go steady with this because I do think it's quite a strong colour. So I'm just going to start with about 1/2 and see what that does. Can you see how strong of a colour that is? Oh, isn't that pretty going in? Look at that. Oh, I don't want to disturb it, it's so pretty, but we will. And that actually looks good. Yeah, it's actually not as strong as it looks. If you lift the spoon up and drop it down, that looks good. So you can see it is a purple, but there's definitely a slight pinkish, bluish hue to it. So give it a good mix around, and then we're going to go to our yarn. And then what we want to do with this purple is we want the purple to be in the next third. So you just need to rearrange it so that what will happen with this, I'll do it with the other skein, is when we drop it in, it's going to come to about here. So we'll get a bit of mingling into this pale part of the blue, and then this section will just have all of the iris. So I'm going to rearrange the other one so that it looks the same. There we go. So we'll be maintaining a lot of the blue. Some of it will mingle in and merge, and some of it will have its own little show. So bring it over to the pot again, drop it down about the same. So let's have a look. Yeah, that's cool. Drop it in, give it a stir around. Can you see the shade there? It's really pretty. So drop it to about the same thing, 1/3, just gently. That's about there. And then stir around until all of that dye has disappeared. Again, it won't take very long. And where they meet, you get a gorgeous, blue toned purplish thing going on. It's really pretty. And that's almost gone already. I'll just give it a couple more seconds to make sure that we've got rid of all of that iris dye. So now, same thing, take that out. Oh, can you see where they've met there, the colours? Oh, it's so pretty just here, but we've still got lots of that lovely blue. Just squidge. Oh, I put the wrong end squidging with the glove. So take that out, drop it in, and then we're going to do the final colour. So for the final colour, we're going to have a bit of green, because there's leaves obviously on the beautiful flower, and we do want a hint of that green to represent the leaf. So that's how I'm using the sour apple. And because it's spring, you know, this is a lovely fresh springy green. And again, I'm going steady with this. So let's start with just about 1/2 and see what that does. Isn't it a lovely green? Let's see. I think I might just add a smidge more, but I don't want to overdo it. Maybe a teeny bit more. There we go. That will be good. Give that a stir. And then we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to move the skein around so that we get the undyed bit that will get dunked in. So now you can see we've got this undyed bit, which is going to get the green, and then we will let it merge through a little bit. I mean, green into purple is not a natural kind of transition, so that might go a kind of more indescript colour, if you like, here, but where it blends into the blue, that'll be beautiful, because green into blue works, you know, it's a very good fade in. So we're going to go over to the pot again. In it goes. Oh, that looks good. Drop it in, a good wish around. So get that undyed bit, predominantly the section with the green, so that we get a nice, yeah, that's good look. Can you see how that was a lovely green? And then let it go a little bit deeper into the water. Give that a wish around. And again, it will disappear quite quickly. Let's have a look. That's really good. And that green has virtually gone already. So with this skein, we've got the gorgeous blues and purples of the flower, and then we've got that hint of green for the leaf. Perfect. So that green has gone now. So we can actually now drop the whole skein back in. And now bring it up to temperature. So what I mean by that, somebody also asked me what I meant by bring it up to temperature. All I mean is raise the temperature back up till it gets to that simmering point. And then that's hot enough for it to set, and then we can pop it outside to join the other skein. So there we go, our beautiful yarn is all dyed and it's outside cooling down. So come back in part 2, we're going to rinse the yarn, we're going to get it dried, we're going to skein it up, all ready to start knitting our beautiful blanket. So I will see you back soon.
Blue-eyed Mary, oh my goodness, is gorgeous.
It is.
But it does seem like an insulting name for a Tudor queen.
Kind of does, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
What a flower.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
I'd never heard of it before.
No, I hadn't heard of it. It's kind of very similar to a forget-me-not, isn't it? But I think a forget-me-not is smaller.
Right.
And a forget-me-not is a different flower.
Yes.
You know. But otherwise, this would be called a forget-me-not. Yeah, so it's a gorgeous flower, and that's that blueness. I'd love to see one in real life. And it did, you know, when I looked up the flower, it did say that it makes a very good garden plant as well.
Right.
So it likes it sort of woodlandy, because it's in the wild, you'll find it in woodlands.
And look at you go with the potentially poolly contrast yarn.
I know. So, I mean, I'll show you how it's knit up.
Later on.
But that was fun doing that yarn, because that...
Rebellious.
Yes. The way that I dyed that up in the chunks like that, as I said on the show, I would never ever dye it like that with, you know, socks in mind, because it would very likely do some naughtiness. Yes.
But sometimes naughtiness is fun.
Yes, it's fun to have a play around sometimes, though, isn't it?
Yes, most definitely. But what about the knitting? Oh my goodness, that's the best bit, isn't it? And that's all to come later on in the show, with Kay's advice too, as we said earlier on, about what to do if you're not dyeing your own yarn. So don't miss that in part 2 of My Favourite Blanket. But right now, it's time for us to find out what's off your needle.
Ah, yes, because although I
didn't do it right. Kay Jones, what's off your needle?
Yes, just one needle, because I don't have anything knitted finished because of said hand problem. However, what I discovered, I couldn't, I had to do something with my hands in this sort of time that I couldn't knit. And I thought, well, maybe if I try something else that's a different movement, I might be all right, you know. So I went back to an old love of mine that I haven't done for years. To be honest, I thought, no, I don't know if I really fancy doing it because I hadn't done it for years. But I absolutely loved it. And I'm talking about cross stitch. I picked up a little bit of cross stitch, and it was just fortunate that I actually had a little kit that I just bought. And I saw this kit on Ali's show, Ali, Little Drops of Wonderful. She'd just knitted? No, she hadn't. She'd just sewn this little cross-stitch project. And I was watching her one night, and Bryony walked past, and she looked down at the screen, and she went, oh, I love that. And I just remembered that she'd loved it, and I went straight on and I bought the kit. So it was just lucky that I had it. I'd only had it for a few days.
Bryony is, of course, our daughter.
Bryony is our daughter. So I decided to do this little cross stitch, and the cross stitch I got is this, and it's from Knit Not Crafts. Here you can see the name of the business, and I think she's on Etsy. Is she on Etsy? No, it might not be Etsy, but anyway, it's Knit Not Crafts, and it's this little octopus that Bryony saw. And she's like, oh, I really, really love that. I said, right, okay. Well, I didn't tell her at the time. I just went and bought it. So I thought, I'm going to make it. So in the little kit, you get everything you need. So you get the cloth, which is an Ada. I think it's 14 count. That's the kind of standard, isn't it? You get the threads and you get the chart. And then you get a little tiny cute hoop. So I totally made it. And I put it in a frame. So look. Oh, how cute. So I made this little octopus, and it's so adorable. And so I love these colours, these sort of greeny blue colours. And I finished this in just a couple of days. It's only small, but I loved it that much, and my hand was all right. You know, I was going steady, but I think because it's such a different movement to knitting, it was all right. So I was like, oh, this is fantastic. I can use my sort of downtime to do a little bit of cross stitch, and I just loved it. And it's a brilliant little kit. I think it was about £8, something like that, £8 or £9. It's a UK company, came really quick, so I really, really loved it. And I finished it within a couple of days, and I thought, oh, what am I going to do now? So I thought, I'll just do another. So I'd obviously still got the chart and everything else. I just needed the threads. So I had all of these colours in my thread stash, if you can call it such. So I had all these colours to hand. So I thought, oh, have I got colours that I can sort of create another one using them? And I totally did. So I made a little friend. And then I just got these frames from Amazon and framed them myself. But I did get some of that board. What's it called? I can't remember what it's called. Do you know the board that you use for framing things? You know what I mean. It's like a really thick sort of cardboard. I didn't do the whole stretching thing, because I know when you have them professionally framed, embroideries and sewing things, people stretch them, don't they, and sew around the back. I didn't do it that way, because this is only tiny little things. I did. So I washed it, I ironed it, I sort of made sure it was nice and flat, and then I just sort of folded it over this backing board and just used masking tape to stick it down on the back. Come out perfectly lovely.
Gorgeous.
So I'm thrilled with those. So it was great to do a bit of cross stitch.
Great to see you doing it again.
Yeah, it was really fun, and I enjoyed it so much more than I thought I would.
Woohoo!
I really, really did. And I think because these were just little things as well, I really liked that, because when I used to do cross stitch historically in the past, I did loads, and I did big things. Mum's got most of them actually hung up in her flat. I've got a couple of things, but not much. She's got most of them. I used to do big things like this, where it need a big frame. But because there's just a little thing, cute little thing, Bryony loves them. They're hung up on her bedroom wall now. So she's got little friends. And I kept them in this bag. Isn't this gorgeous? This was made for me by my lovely friend Sasha. She doesn't have a shop or anything. She just made me this. It's one of these with the zips here. So that was brilliant to be able to use that little bag. Gorgeous.
Speaking of gorgeous things, it's time to find out what we've got to do in this section of My Favourite Blanket. So without further ado, let's get back to Kay for part 2.
Welcome back everybody to part 2 of My Favourite Blanket. I'm so excited because our yarn is dry. But what I did after it had cooled down outside is I brought it in, I gave it a lovely rinse in some wool wash. My wool wash of preference at the moment is Eucalan Lavender. I have used soak in the past, or any other gentle wool wash is absolutely fine. And I then squidged it out and then set it to dry. So it's dried overnight for me, and now we are here with our beautiful yarn. So I've got 4 skeins here. As I said before, I dyed up 2 of each of the 50 grams. So I've got 4 50-gram skeins, and I'm going to be working with 2 together. So I've skeined up 2 of them so you can see just what it looks like in the skein. Isn't it pretty? What's been super fun for me dyeing these yarns is playing with the variegated, because normally I would never dye yarn in the way that I've dyed this, because it might well pull if you were knitting socks, for example. It might not do, depending on your gauge, but it might. You know, there's a good chance it might pull. But because of the nature of this blanket, and because at the moment we're still in the increase section, I can do that because we are increasing stitches every single row. So we are, you know, we're breaking up all of those colours. So it's just been so fun to be able to dye yarn in this way. I'll dye it slightly differently when we get to the middle section, because in the middle section the stitch count will remain the same. So before we skein up these 2 lovely ones, not skein up, before we cake them up, I've just had a couple of questions that have cropped up since the last episode, so I thought I would just cover those now. One question that's been really common is, can I have like one background colour held the whole way through? Yes, absolutely you can. So if you wanted to buy, you know, a number of skeins of a neutral colour, I don't know, Cascade Heritage, or even an undyed yarn, or a tonal yarn from a dyer, or whatever you want, then yes, absolutely you can do that and just have that one colour going all the way through the blanket. And then the other 50 grams each time you can choose, you know, a yarn from your stash. Now with regards to choosing the yarn from your stash and sort of what colours to choose is really entirely up to you. You don't have to choose colours that I've used, and a lot of people are not doing that. You know, they're going their own way with their colour choice, and that's just brilliant. It's entirely up to you. But if you did want to follow along with me in terms of colour, but you just weren't sure what to choose, then I would just think about the basic colours that we're using each time. So in this instance, we've got blue, we've got purple, and we've got green. So if there's a particular one of those colours that you really love, say you really love blue, you might just want to choose a blue variegated or a blue speckled or whatever. It might be that you have a yarn in your stash that's got maybe blues and purples. Brilliant, use that. You might have something that's green and blue. Again, use that. Really interpret it in your own way, in exactly how you want to. But that's what I would do. If you want to follow along with me, but you're not dyeing the yarn yourself, then just think of the basic colours that I'm using each time. Go to your stash and see if you've got anything that relates to those colours. And then you can either do as I've said, you can hold a background colour the same all the way through and then just vary one of your skeins each time. Or if you've got a 100-gram skein, you could just split that in half, double it and use that as your yarn each time. Or you can do what I've done and have 2 different yarns that complement each other. It's really entirely up to you. There's lots and lots and lots of different options. You know, you could use mini skeins if you wanted to. You would need more each time, but if you wanted to use mini skeins, then you could do that. the world's your oyster, really, with this blanket, I would say. So the other question, on the last episode, I showed you how to correct that stitch. You know, if you don't pick up both, if you don't knit with both of your strands, how to then correct it on the next row. And I've had a couple of people ask, well, how do you correct that if you don't notice it, and you only notice it a few rows after? So, you know, it's somewhere down here in your knitting that you notice that you didn't pick up that extra strand. Now you can do one of two things. You can leave it. If it doesn't bother you that much, it won't come to any harm. You know, there's no problem in just leaving it. If you want to correct it, then what I would do is I would just drop down like you do if you wanted to correct any type of stitch. Say you were knitting a jumper and you noticed that you'd purled a stitch instead of knit a stitch, which I've done something like that before. Then you would just drop down that stitch. Just do exactly the same thing. Just drop down to the stitch where you didn't use both of the strands and pick it back up using both of the strands. So really simple, really. It's the same sort of process. Right, so I think it's now time to cake up this beautiful yarn. Okay, so I'm going to cake up this variegated one first. So we can take off that cable tie now, and then we need to take off the ties that are connecting it. Let's see if I can identify correctly this time, shall we? I'm not holding my breath. Yeah, that one is definitely just holding the skein together. And let's look at the next one. There's quite a few ties on. Ah, look, that's the one that's holding the skein together. Is it? No, it's not. Do you know it's not? This is what I find so confusing about these skeins. They can sometimes look like it's holding the skein together and it's not. So that one I'm going to snip off. I'm convinced they've been tied differently, but maybe it's just me. Well, let's have a look at this one. That one is just a tie. Oh, I think I'm good this time, everyone. So I think this one would be the one that's holding everything together. Yes, haha. So we need to pop it over the Swift. Pull it out. My little bit of a temperamental Swift, but it behaved this time. And then find the other tie and we can snip it now. And hopefully that's the one that's holding everything together. So what you will have on your skein, I don't know if you can see, but there will be one strand that comes off that's sort of on the outside, that's pulling from the outside, and one that's on the inside. So you want to choose the one that's pulling from the outside, which in my case is this one. So let's just move that stuff out of the way, and then whatever ball wind you're using, you just need to thread it through the little guide eye into that slot on the top of your bobbiny thing, and then start winding. There we go. And I find with this ball winder, which has been fine by the way, I do have to sort of hold on to this metal thing. Is that normal? I don't know. I've not found a way of doing it without holding on to the metal guidey thingy, but it's perfectly fine. So I'll just keep winding. There we go. Oh my goodness, this looks so amazing in the cake. I can't even tell you. Well, I can, I'll show you. I had a feeling it'd look super pretty in the cake, and it absolutely does. Let's just wind that bit around. Oh my goodness, it looks so beautiful. And now, of course, I do want to knit some socks with this and see what it looks like, but I don't know if you can see. Oh my goodness, it just looks so pretty with all those colours. Oh, it's gorgeous. Love it. So I'm going to wind up the speckled one and then we can get to the knitting. Right, we're ready to start knitting section 3. So I've got my blanket here, as you can see, completed sections 1 and 2, and it's still on the 32-inch cable, but it is getting quite scrunched up now. So I'm actually going to change over to the 40-inch on this first row. So I thought it'd be useful just to show you how I do that. I presume it's the same as everyone else, but you never know. So I just looked actually, because normally what I would do is I'd take off the needle tip that I'm not gonna, that the yarn's not attached to, the one that's at the other end. I'd take that off and put a stopper on. I've just looked in my set for higher bamboos and I can't find a stopper in there in either of the higher sets that I've got. Truth be told, I don't normally put a stopper on. Well, so I'm just going to do what I normally do. I obviously am a risk taker when it comes to this, but if there was a stopper there, I would have put one on here just to be safe, you don't want stitches flying off. But there wasn't one, and in all fairness, I don't normally put one on. So I'm just going to remove the needle tip from the end that I'm not working with. Scrunch all your stitches up so you've got a good amount of cable, so you're not gonna, you're not gonna be risking too much. And then I'm gonna get my longer cable, this is the 40-inch, and then put this needle tip on. And with these higher bamboos, I always use these little rubber grips. They are higher ones, but to be honest, you could just get a pair of rubber gloves and put your rubber gloves on and do it that way. You don't necessarily need these. But I've got them, so I'm going to use them. There we go, that's nice and tight. And now I will start knitting with this. And yeah, I don't have a needle tip on the other end either. I mean, what you could do if you don't have stoppers is you could just get another needle tip from the set and just screw it onto the end. So I'm going to start now knitting section 3. So what we're going to be doing for section 3, we're continuing on in the way that we've been knitting the first 2 sections. So I'm just going to knit all the stitches to the last stitch and then knit front back into the last stitch. And we're repeating that through the whole of section 3 until you've got 206 stitches. So that's 206 stitches. For section 3, that's the number that you are aiming for. Now, as I did before, I'm starting off my row by knitting the first 4 stitches with my old yarn. And that just makes the weaving in of ends really easy and also keeps our edges nice and neat. So there we go. 4 stitches, and I can now bring in my new yarn. How exciting. So holding them double as we've been doing, we're now just going to carry on to the end. So leave a tail just enough to weave in, 6 inches maybe, and carry on knitting. So after your first stitch, just make sure you're knitting with your actual yarn and not your tail, because that's easily done. And now we can just knit away. So I'm going to knit to the last stitch, and then as we've done before, I'm going to be knitting front back. Okay, so I'm getting close to the end now, and it's actually been no problem at all not having a stopper on the end of that cable. There was no risk at all. I'm sat still, I'm not moving around, I'm not putting my knitting down, and it's been absolutely fine. So no danger, I would say. Okay, so we're coming up to the last stitch. So here we go. And we're going to do a knit front back into that last stitch. So knit into the front, needle round, knit into the back, knit and off. So that's that first row done. So before we now carry on with the rest, we need to just sort out this needle tip onto the other end. So go and find the other end of your new cable, and you can see there was no risk at all. We've got loads of room now for getting to the centre point on this bigger cable. So we just need to take off the other needle tip now. I do love these higher bamboos. I'm sure I've spoke about these needles like a bazillion times before, and I've used them loads now for all kinds of projects, and I do really love them. I don't mind the cables. I like the fact that they swivel, but I think they could be a bit better behaved. You know, they're very thin and they do tend to sort of kink up quite a lot. So I think they could be, like I say, a little bit better behaved, but they're perfectly fine. So just twist on that needle tip nice and tight. Done with that 32-inch one now. So the rest of the blanket I'll be knitting on this 40-inch one. And the other advantage is now you can stretch out your stitches and really see your blanket in all its glory, which I think is lovely. So now we can just carry on knitting this whole section, following the same formula, just that one row, repeat, knit to the last stitch, knit front back until you have 206 stitches. You now know everything you need to know to knit your way through section 3 of my favourite blanket. So I hope you really enjoyed that, and I hope if you're going to dye yarn that you really enjoy these colours. I'm just so excited. I'm just beyond excited to start knitting these in. Oh, and I just love that variegated so much, and as I've just said, I really am tempted to dye some more up and just try and knit some socks with it and see what happens. It could well be completely naughty and do some really naughty pooly things, but I just love the colours so much, and they're so springy, aren't they? I think they're such spring-like colours for me, and that's just such a lovely thing to be knitting with as we come out of, you know, the dreariness and the drabness that winter can be. And I will see you back in a month. You've now got a month to knit through this section. I know that lots of people are whizzing through their sections super quick, and that's brilliant. You know, if you want to do that, enjoy it whilst you're doing it, and then pop it away and come back next month and we'll do the next section. But then I've also seen some people who are only just starting their blankets. So, you know, it's brilliant. We've got plenty of time for all the people that are playing a little bit of catch up, but also now if you are right on section 3 like I am, you can dive into your stash if you're going into your stash to choose your yarns, or you can get into your dye pots and dye up the yarn. So I am going to sit here for a lovely few minutes knitting away happily, and I will see you back next month for more My Favourite Blanket.
Was just gorgeousness. The colours are like so amazing against the others.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like just perfection.
I'm really thrilled with how this is looking. So here we are, look, with the next section. And isn't it lovely?
The edge is blooming.
Yeah, I mean, the edge is the best thing for me. And the question that I've had quite frequently is people asking me if they can add a border, either an I-cord border as they knit, or can they add a border afterwards? And my answer to that is you can do whatever you want, but the main feature of this blanket really for me was getting these lovely neat edges. And
for me, it's when you imagine it finished.
Yeah.
And that neat edge all the way around.
Yeah, and you don't need a border. You know, that's the point for me. You're just knitting the blanket and you're done. You don't need to faff with adding a border afterwards, and you don't need to work that border as you go, which can also be a bit of a faff. So it's just the pleasure of working through all the gorgeous yarns.
I think as well, quite often, it is the border's needed. You know, sometimes things are needed on
the border
things.
Is needed.
But the whole point of this design...
There you go.
That it doesn't have a border.
You stabbed you in the face.
That's fine. It's gorgeous.
So I'm really pleased with how this, the gorgeous blue has worked up. And it sort of started off knitting up slightly differently, and then it changed a bit as it got up here when the stitch count, is just changing. But I just think it looks gorgeous. Do you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of a Monet painting.
Yeah.
With the water.
Beautiful.
Just lovely. And I've got about 10 grams of each left to pop into my mitered squares, so I'll show you those next time.
Now, Kay has, of course, shown you everything that you need to know to knit this next section of the blanket. But if you would like to download the pattern, it's available for you right now. It's linked in the show notes below, and access to that pattern will cost you the equivalent of $2. And the best part is, by getting access to that pattern, you'll also be able to download the latest Knitability magazine. You'll also be able to watch our next patron exclusive show, which is next Sunday. I'll tell you more about that a little bit later. But the most important thing of all is, by downloading that pattern, you will be helping keep us on air.
Yes.
Because without our patrons, we would not be here. There would be no show, no Bakery Bears.
Imagine.
So please do go, if you would like, and download that pattern, because you'll be getting the pattern and you'll also be helping us keep making shows like this one.
Absolutely.
And now it's time for the Endy Bits.
The Endy Bits.
Woohoo! Yes, Knitability, as I've said a couple of times, our magazine, brand new issue coming out. Don't miss it.
Yes.
It's going to be super cool. Also, our next big patron event is the Platinum pattern.
Yes.
Which comes out on the 1st of March.
Yes.
We have just finished our last big patron event, which was Valenvent, where all Bakery Bear patrons were knitting through the Cherish Cowl, and there's been loads of amazing,
beautiful cowls that have been finished.
Valenvent is back for good. It'll be back next year.
Yes.
This year, as I've said, it was the Cherish Cowl, and it's just been the loveliest thing to see everyone knitting all their Cherish minis, and it's just gorgeous.
Yeah.
But now we're getting ready, like I said, for the next big thing, and that is the 1st of March. So in the run-up to the 1st of March and the launch of the next Platinum pattern, we've got our patron-only show, which will be out on the 26th of February. So the patron-exclusive show, 26th of February. You can watch it live at 2 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, and that's available to Silver, Gold and Platinum Bakery Bear patrons. All patrons can watch the show whenever they like from 3 on the day of broadcast. So 26th of February, 3 onwards, you can tune in and watch the show whenever you like. And I'm sure there'll be a bit of Platinum Collection talk.
I'm sure
as well as all the other lovely things.
Yes.
Also, as well, in the run-up to the launch of that pattern, Kay has recorded a very special design diary, which will be going out, I think it's the day before it comes out.
Yeah, that sounds right.
A day or two, I can't remember.
Just before it comes out.
Right before it comes out. Special design diary where you'll get to see the story behind the Platinum Collection pattern.
Yes.
Which comes out on the 1st of March, which is very exciting.
Very
you were going to talk
exciting.
about some needles.
Oh, just one thing.
Because you've done a review on these.
I've done a review on these needles. I bought these needles for Dan
Came
for
out this
Christmas.
week.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, came out on Tuesday.
Right. So, I bought these needles for Dan for Christmas on the recommendation of one of our patrons, actually. She told me about them. And I wasn't aware of them. I thought, I'm definitely going to go and have a look at those. And I thought they looked great. So I bought a set for Dan for Christmas. It's an interchangeable set by Knit Pro. And it's called the Mindful Collection. Now, there's different sort of sets available. This one I've got is the kind of, I would say, the introductory set, maybe. I'm not sure. It's the set that runs from 3mm up to 6mm needles. And that's the little pouch with everything in it. And these needles are really great. If you like Chowgu needles, then I think you would really like these needles, because the cable uses the same technology, I don't know if that's the right word, construction, as the Chowgu needles. So I've done a full review of these needles, and I have knit with them myself.
Watch it right now, here.
I've knit quite a lot with them myself, so I've gone into it with a bit of knowledge. And so I just wanted to let you know about those needles if you're not aware of them, because I wasn't aware of them. And so far, from my experience of them, I think they're a really great needle. Yeah.
Cool. So, folks, oh my goodness, that is it. It's the end of another Bakery Bears video show. But fear not, because yes, we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.
Ooh, exciting.
Which will feature the next in the rise and fall of the monasteries. And I've been working on that for the last week or so, and I'll be working on that for the rest of this week, and I'm very excited.
Very excited. I know where he's going, and you're going to love it.
It's like beautiful stuff.
It's a classic monastery.
Absolutely classic, and I can't wait to share it with all of you, and that's coming next time. So thank you so much for watching.
Thank you, everybody. Get knitting your blankets. I can't wait to see them.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks for more.
See you soon.
Bye.
Sitting and knitting, Stan and Kay, the bakery bears. Enthusiasm's not quitting for Stan and Kay, the bakery bears. They'll take you to fabulous places of which their favorites they'll share. You better buy a pattern, get yourself a bakery bear. You'll find yourself in a castle while watching the bakery bears. It never feels like a hassle to sit and watch the bakery bears. What's on your shelf or what's in your oven, or maybe a shawl you'll want to wear. So sit yourself right down and watch Dan and Kay